For me, one of the most helpful things in my own Christian faith as a practitioner has been a framework that David and Redeemer and the Center for Faith and Work really introduced me to, which was looking at work through three different lenses or frameworks. One is heart or motivations, and the second is community or relationships, and then the last is world or the work itself. And so today what I'm going to talk to you about is those three different ways. I'm going to not just tell you about them, I'm going to tell you a story from the Bible that we did for each one of those three, because I'm a storyteller. I love to tell stories, and so I think people like to hear them, and I think they reveal meaning without telling it in some ways. So I'm going to start first with the heart motivations piece. And this is really about our relationship with God. So what is my personal relationship with the Lord, and how does that impact what I do with my work? This is why we do things. A lot of people know what they do and how they do it, but very few people take the time or reflection space to think about why they're doing something, what they're motivated by, why they do one thing instead of another, why they choose. Sometimes we can talk about that with calling. Why am I a teacher, not a doctor? But it actually affects even when you get into your day-to-day work. Why am I responding in anger instead of in kindness? What is driving that? What are my heart motivations in my personal life or in my work life? They're actually making me respond in certain ways. And that's what we're talking about when we think about why, the why and the motivations piece. As we know, a lot of theology has told us our heart is turned into ourselves. Augustine and Curvatus and say, and so we were made to have expansive hearts that love others and love God, but instead we've turned in and we are selfish. And Jonathan Edwards had a beautiful sermon, and he said, "Before and as God created man, he was exalted and noble and generous, but now he is debased and ignoble and selfish." And so when we walk into any place, our office, our home, our church, we're walking in with a created heart that was made to be big, but because of the fall, we've come and we've been turned in on ourselves and selfish. And so these heart motivations and the discernment we have to apply gets a little complicated. One way that you guys might be familiar to talk about heart motivations is our pastor Tim Keller talks about it a lot, is through the lens of idol worship. And so when you think about idol worship, the way he talks about it with disordered loves and loving things greater than you love God, that is one way to think about heart motivations. So do I love wealth, power, and status more than I love the Lord? And so I'm worshiping. If I think life has no meaning, if I don't have certain things, and if you can fill that blank in with anything other than God, then you're worshiping an idol. And so people are pretty familiar with that. But the doctrine today I'm going to talk to you about is another way to look through your heart motivations is being an adopted child of God. And so that can change our heart motivations for how we respond to things. Adoption is one of the most beautiful things. I think it's one of the most beautiful ways we can see ourselves as Christians. I have an adopted nephew from Vietnam. He's 7 years old now. And a biological niece in the same family. She's 9. My brother and sister-in-law could have children. They had no problem. They just really had a heart for orphans. So they wanted to adopt my nephew Kai from Vietnam when he was 1. And when he first came home when we first got him on our gotcha day, I don't know if you guys have adopted friends, but they call it the gotcha day. He had this habit of holding 2 pieces of food or candy, usually candy, actually, we've had to pull him away from it, but food in his hands at all times, because he has lens from 0 to 1 was that the world was scarce. And so he never knew where his next food was going to come from. He was always hungry, and we had to retrain him from acting like an orphan to acting like a child. And so it took years actually for him to trust that his parents would actually be willing to give him food because we had it. And so when we think about functional theology in people's lives, a lot of times if we don't have a really robust understanding that we're adopted children, we can functionally act as orphans. And so we make impulsive decisions because we need to take care of ourselves, and we don't think that God's going to take care of us. And it happens at work too. So I'm going to tell you a story. I asked my friend Chris, who's a teacher, and I think his picture should appear at some point. There he is. The framework is motivation, and the doctrine is adoption, and I'm going to tell you the story about my friend Chris. So I asked him to talk to me about his job in light of adoption and how it changes. This is what he said. "As I settled into my usual table at the neighborhood coffee shop, I laid out my perfectly creased New York Times crossword and cupped my bold roast drip in my hands. My attire, a t-shirt and flip-flops, was a sure sign that summer had started. My friend Cal, the shop owner, looked over at me and tapped his wrist, indicating he would come by my table to chat in a few minutes. That morning was the first morning of my summer sabbatical, a time to rest, work on my own pursuits, and travel with my wife. This annual season was the one perk that seemed to erase my doubts about choosing a career in education. On that day, though, when the first taste of freedom should have been its sweetest, I was rattled by a line of men in suits. I tried to enjoy my crossword, but my attention was drawn to the sharply dressed businessmen in line for coffee. The rhythm with which they entered and left reminded me they were going places. Places they undoubtedly made more money and more social capital than I. Supposedly free, I sat at my table with unlimited time to do anything I wanted, anything except acquire money, power, and prestige. As the phrase, "just a teacher," echoed in my mind, the floodgates of doubt opened and my demeanor spiraled down. I packed up my paper, told Cal I'd catch him later, and headed home. When the doors of my classroom are closed, I love my work. The moment I step outside into a world that values wealth and power, though, my insecurities explode. That morning highlighted a struggle I have faced throughout my career, my identity as an adopted son of God. If I seek my worth in the prestige of my job, then I will forever cycle into despondency. Though it is a daily struggle, I have to seek my worth in Christ, because I have been adopted as a son of God through Jesus. I have an identity that outweighs my paycheck, any paycheck I could bring home, or any social capital I could acquire. Without the promise of already possessing the only status that matters for eternity, I likely would not have lasted into my second decade as an educator. I still struggle to orient myself to Christ, but I work to enjoy the benefits God has provided me in my profession. When I remember that his favor rests on me as the love of a father rests on a son, I begin to savor my sabbatical as a foretaste of the ultimate rest the Father will bring when Christ returns to claim his kingdom and call his children home. So if you can see that this is about his heart motivations, that it's not about his he could change jobs and he could do something else, but there's always going to be another more prestigious job, another job that's going to bring more clout. And so to deal with his heart motivations, he actually needs to think about his status as an adopted child of God. I think one of the most encouraging things, at the Gospel Coalition, we talk to a lot of pastors, a lot of local church pastors, which is great, which is what y'all are doing. And one of the most encouraging things that I can tell them is, I think you already do 2/3 of what I'm going to talk about today, you're already doing. You're talking about heart motivations, and you're talking about relationships, which is what I'm about to talk about. But a lot of times they're being talked about in the context of our private lives, our home life or our church life. And we're not really talking about them, what it means in the work life, in the public life of people. And so I think if pastors could reframe what they're already doing and really just think about how those things are applied in work contexts, and that will take a lot of interviews, vocational interviews with practitioners, I think it actually could explode how people feel these doctrines applied in their own lives and hearts. And then they will start to see that this is really not about faith and work. This is about all of life. And I think if they can see that, I think that they will just understand God's love for them in so many new ways and understand the role that you guys can play in their lives to help them bridge that gap. So the next one, I'm going to go to community and relationships, the framework part 2. And that's really about, so if the first one is our relationship with God, then the second one is about our relationship with others. And so this is the community aspect. David talked about the church being scattered and exiled. So Sunday, it's the church gathered, and then Monday through Saturday, it's the church scattered. And you guys might be familiar with Martin Luther calling practitioners and people who out in the world, a scattered world, as the masks of God. And so that's how he thought about it, that God could have chosen to feed his people, feed us today by manna from heaven and just drop it. Or he could have spoken the fruit into existence like he did in Genesis. But instead, he chooses to use other people to make us interdependent with one another. So work becomes actually one of the best ways we can love our neighbors. It becomes a way that we actually not only bear God's image as his image bearers and mirror him, but as Christian, and everyone does that, Christians and non-Christians alike, we all bear God's image. But not all of us are his ambassadors. Christians who are going forth into the world in ways that represent him are his ambassadors. And so we have this great ability to be his masks and to love others in a way that he would hopefully have loved them. Do we do it perfectly all the time? No. So we're always pointing to Christ as the hero, not us. But we get to be the masks of God and do that way. When Luther addresses the petition in the Lord's Prayer that asks to give us daily bread, he says that when we pray for daily bread, we're praying for everything that must happen for us to have and enjoy. And this is what he says. You must open and expand your thinking so that it reaches not only as far as the flour bin and baking oven, but also out over the broad fields, the farmlands, and the entire country that produces, processes, and conveys to us our daily bread and all kinds of nourishment. For New Yorkers, that's a little bit harder than people who live in Colorado. We don't see anything except the grocery aisle. And so we have to expand our imagination a little bit more than if you go to Texas and you actually see the wheat. But the point is the same. I don't know if any of you guys have kids and you've seen Richard Scarry's book, What Do People Do All Day? But I went to Redeemer one Sunday morning and taught 5-year-olds faith and work principles from Richard Scarry's book. And I looked at the masks of God and I said, all of these little pigs, like let's use our big imaginations here, they are actually God giving us bread. So when we pray for daily bread, it's all of these people that it takes to get us to that point. And so we often say thank you for the hands that prepare this meal, but thank you for the web programmer who was able to figure out a way to work with all the behind-the-scenes people to get it here. In this room right now, when we think about all of the manufacturing that went into every single piece here, there are thousands of people in this room if these walls or if these tables could speak, and yet we just walk in and enjoy one another. And so people worked to be able to bring us together. We're sitting on chairs because people worked to do that. And so when we think and we expand our minds, we think, wow, this is really a way we love our neighbors. It's a great way to love our neighbors. And so the doctrine I'm going to talk about now, we can put up the next photo, is actually I'm going to talk about the image of God because it fits so well with the relationship aspect. This is my friend Kelly. She works as a pediatric occupational therapist. And so I asked her, when we talked about the image of God, I asked her if she could then talk about how that impacts her work. And this is a great way to think about, too, if you have in the back of your mind, the exilic mindset that David talked about, too. It's all throughout this story as well. I arrived at the hospital to begin my work day and entered the room of my first patient. She weighs less than 3 pounds, and the tubes, wires, and hoses connected to her outnumber the days since she was born. I observe her and notice her ribcage retracting, straining for each breath. She is premature, fragile, not equipped for life outside the womb. I use my hands to provide containment and flexion. I tenderly reposition and massage her. Then I move to my next patient, a teenage girl who is recovering from brain surgery. Part of her brain was removed in hopes that it would stop or at least reduce her epileptic seizures. Her surgery has left her hemiplegic, unable to use her left side. She is disheartened that simple tasks now take immense focus and time. I want to make her feel like a normal teenager, so I get several bottles of nail polish, and we practice coordination tasks by doing something that is both familiar and important to her. Those are just my first 2 patients of many for the day. In my work, I arrange brain pathways, heal bones, stretch muscles, and calm fears. And I play. Mostly, I play. I am a pediatric occupational therapist, and I play for the glory of God. Often the world of medical billing and reimbursement favors patients with an acute injury, like a broken bone or curable illness, the type that can heal with short-term rehab or mending. No doubt I'm called to tend those sorts of people. But I feel just as called to those dealing with chronic conditions, the ones that will likely never improve and as a result are often overlooked. I see every child as made in the image of God and therefore valuable and worthy of respect and dignity. God did not equate human worth with giftedness. He loved us while we were still sinners and provided redemption for us, even though we did not and do not deserve it. Jesus frequently healed those who were chronically ill and forced into isolation. He saw their needs and heard their stories. He gave them healing and hope. In him, I can follow his example and treat my patients with respect, no matter their rehab potential. So when I arrive at the end of my day to stretch my little friend, a sweet 9-year-old girl who can't talk, will always be wheelchair-bound, and has intense difficulty controlling her movements, I stretch her lovingly. Biomechanically, I'm preventing contractures, but theologically, I am affirming her status as image bearer, showing her that she is worthy of my best work. So I could have looked at this doctrine image bearer from the motivations piece, which would have been how does me knowing that I am an image bearer affect how I work? So I bear God's image, I represent, I need to do that. But we put this doctrine at this point because there's a sense where I'm God's image bearer, but so is this person. And I need to treat my clients, my patients, my contractors, my bosses, everyone as an image bearer as well, because God made them intentionally and put them on this earth. So last night we were in an event, and a guy spoke about one of his not so proud moments at work was when he works in a web technology digital marketing company, and his clients, his high-level clients, have been pretty difficult at times, and so they've gotten off phone calls, and he's been very frustrated, and so he will talk about that. And one of the things I said was, just like this little girl, this 9-year-old girl who can't walk as God's image bearer, and we treat her that way, we also treat difficult clients that way too. And so how does that shape difficult people who are against us, people who don't have our best interests at heart, it's like David talked about with exile. They're made in the image of God too. How does that doctrine shape how I treat them? The last framework lens I'm going to talk about is the world piece. And so if motivations was about my relationship with God, relationships was about my relationship with people, world is my relationships with my work itself and the culture at large. And that's a lot where David spent time thinking about earlier was how the everyday office translates into cultural work. His story about Flash Boys, that's more of the world piece. How is the actual work itself? What is my relationship? How does the gospel change my relationship with the work I'm doing itself? And I think that one of the questions I think that people will ask is they'll say, this is from a Steve Garber book, now that I know what I know about my industry, about my office, what do I do with that? I'm now implicated in the brokenness because I'm in it. So now what do I do with it? And that is the piece that goes out into the world, into the work. And so that's the world piece. It changes our relationship. Sometimes we think it's small things about our work, and sometimes it can be big. I'm going to cite another Michael Lewis financial thing, but The Big Short recently was up, and you guys know decisions made by a small group of people affected massive things in the United States. People lost homes because of it. And so we actually, and if you guys saw the movie, it wasn't as much in the book, but when they go down to Florida and they're researching the housing market and how bad it is, these real estate agents, they're totally disconnected. They don't even put together that what they're doing about selling homes to strippers who can't afford it. They don't even put together that's affecting this huge part of the market. And so when we think about relationship with work and world, that's what we're talking about. How do the little things, they seem so small, but what's the narrative we're putting it in that actually has a lot bigger ramifications if things go bigger. And so I'm going to tell you a story. The next person I'm going to feature is, the doctrine is going to be cultural mandate from Genesis 1:28, which says, "And God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.'" And so theologians call this the cultural mandate, where as God's image bearers, we reflect his nature, and then we continue to pull out the flourishing of the world and its potential. Al Wolters writes, "Mankind, as God's representatives on earth, carry on where God left off. This is now to be a human development of the earth. The human race will fill the earth with its own kind, and it will form the earth for its own kind. From now on, the development of the created earth will be societal and cultural in nature. In a single word, the task ahead is civilization." And so my friend John works at the intersection of this as a city planner in New York City. And so I asked him to tell me about how the cultural mandate from Genesis 1:28 is affected by the fall, all of those things through his work. And so that's what I'll tell you his story. "I'm a city planner for New York City. When a developer wants to build something that is not currently allowed, he or she has to submit a proposal to the city. My job is to understand the project, review the application, and sign off on its completeness. At a deeper level, though, I want to make decisions that contribute to the shalom of the city, which means I need to understand God's original vision for human flourishing. The cultural mandate in Genesis affirms the importance of cultivating the earth and subduing it for God's glory. Realizing that God's vision for human flourishing includes development, cultivation, and order has brought excitement to my work. In order to determine whether a particular proposal contributes to the welfare of a particular place, I must look deeply at the surrounding community, its people, personality, and passions. Only then can I judge how to best support new development and investment. In theory, my job is quite simple. Yet in reality, I face many competing goals and values that sometimes contradict my faith. For example, New York City real estate development usually favors people with deep pockets and impressive platforms. Wealthy neighborhoods have clout, and therefore the ability to frame the conversation in their favor. Yet my faith calls me to care for the poor and vulnerable. Working in this tension frequently challenges me. I get lost in a world that measures flourishing differently than Christianity does. I churn inside when I see backroom dealings or bad projects that harm neighborhoods. I know the stakes for these communities, and most of the time I am powerless to act justly without jeopardizing my job. In such times, surrounded by the realities of my job, I feel crushed by this cultural mandate to cultivate. Other times, though, my work gives me a glimpse of the coming redemption of place. Recently, for example, after I presented a plan for a large rezoning project, a woman approached me at a community board meeting. She passionately accused me of being the single most destructive force in her neighborhood, the harbinger of gentrification, and the developer who will cut down her trees. I then explained the complicated and counterintuitive zoning proposal and reassured her that I was there to protect, not harm her neighborhood. We both apologized for complicating the situation, and then she hugged me. I'm comforted when I remember my individual limitations in altering the landscape of development in the city, yet my role in God's plan for redeeming creation, in which the cultural mandate plays a crucial role. While I can't right every wrong, I can try my hardest, trusting in God's gracious involvement in my work. And so if you see how that cultural mandate it's his work, and it can be small, and we can think about it as the individual proposal he's working on, but what he's doing actually has ramifications at a systemic level for the city. And so there's going to be certain buildings that are brought in, certain community centers that are brought in, that actually are going to be affected by how he views his competing narratives of what flourishing means. So when David, for example, was talking about seek the prosperity of the city and let it prosper, and he said, it would be akin to saying seek the prosperity of the porn industry. The reason why that's so jarring is because it's two competing narratives of what prosperity is. One is the prosperity of what the porn industry thinks is prosperity, and the other one is the prosperity that God thinks is prosperity. And so when we can be sitting at jobs and we actually have the cultural discernment and spiritual discernment to see where those are conflicting, that's where Christ can really work, and we get to be his ambassadors in those places. So I'll leave it at that in terms of the motivations, relationships, world. For me, it's been really helpful to think about if I'm unhappy in a particular work situation, or if I'm frustrated. It's been helpful for me as a practitioner to think, am I frustrated because I have wrong motivations? I'm expecting too much out of work. It should just be work. Or am I frustrated because I don't understand how my work fits into a larger narrative? That would be the world piece. Or is it because I work with difficult people and I don't know how to love them? I could not like my job for any one of those three reasons. And sometimes it all gets under the faith and work umbrella. But it's helpful to think about the different aspects of how I can approach it, as well as think about what doctrines I can meditate on to shape my heart and change. So I hope that helps y'all. Thanks.